really delighted just sharing with those early sign-ons. The response to this topic's been rather overwhelming, but very affirming. So we kind of know that we're sort of sharing something of real interest to lots and lots of different organisations. The amount of different, the range of organisations, large ones, middle and small, all have got this obviously topic on their agenda. So in terms of myself and Dave, so you can sort of see me in the little picture, but David, just move, let us see it on the
Morning.
Yep. So Dave and I have been working together for far too long, really, probably 20, 30 years. Some of you will know us from previous walks of life. Some of you, we will have been consultants and helping with your organisation. So working in partnership has been something that's really important to us, but also kind of always trying to understand what is the real need and how can we help. So that's kind of where we've always been coming from. And right from the get-go, we've put these open events on. We've always wanted to do this, and we do, to kind of share, talk about, discuss. So we're in the conversation with you all about your issues, and then hopefully giving you some nuggets and good thoughts on the day, but obviously just also starting to build the relationship, really. So Dave, can you just move the slide on? In terms of, that's us. So those of you who haven't seen us recently, that's what we look like. And in terms of the style of today, but 90 minutes, we will finish at 11:30. We won't overrun. Obviously, we're going to kind of guide the conversation with some comments and some inputs and hopefully some good insights for you. But we also want your contribution too. It is a forum, so there will be various chances to interact with us and also some breakout activities. And then the outputs of those breakouts will also be collated to become part of the output from the event. We are recording this morning. Several people asked us to do that, so hopefully it's okay for you to be here. If you shouldn't be here and you are, then maybe you do need to stop that camera off. But have a camera on when you can, please. Use the live chat as we go through. We'll cue you in a few points to do that, but do feel free to use it at any time as well. Microphone's on mute, we all know this now. And then there's an opportunity at the end for you to kind of sign up to get the core outputs and also give us some feedback. So that's the general kind of wash for the day, really. So first poll then, to see kind of how we are as we start this morning. So I can just ask Dave to do the poll. So you've probably seen these now, guys. So just how are you feeling right now about lockdown ending? Okay. That is good. I have to say, when I've asked that poll in previous events over the last, say, 5 months, when it was kept off, on, there was a lot more kind of in the anxious frame about it. But hopefully we've all got that sense now of things hopefully moving forward in a consistent way. So a good balance there of positive and excited. But there are some unknowns to deal with, and I think we really realise that, hence the topic of the day, really. Okay, thanks for that. Thanks for that poll. So a little bit, kind of bit more about those of us who don't know us. I know some of you know us perhaps all too well. Some of you don't know us quite so well. So David, just next slide. Oh, I feel like Chris Whitty when I say that. Yeah, so that's a little bit, oops. Right, sorry, I can't quite see the slides there now. Yeah, so just a little bit about us and where we're always coming from, always seeking to work with organisations with kind of openness, honesty, helping you with things that you genuinely need help with. We're always wanting to kind of design things and tailor things to be absolutely right for you. And that's strong intention all the time to bring some insight, but nothing too clever, but to really help make an impact. So those of you who work with us will know that's kind of what we stand on. And then just a quick visual this morning of some of the clients that we work with, just so you might recognise your own names there. But hopefully that gives you an idea of the breadth of the spectrum. And obviously that's giving us a real breadth of what we're hearing from our clients at the moment about kind of where they are sort of starting the thinking on hybrid working. And I think one of the big things for me is talking to clients is some are and some aren't polling the views of their employees. And that was one of the survey questions, data coming shortly. So actually engaging people and asking people what their thoughts are is going to be critical. And we'd really be saying straight off, if you're not doing that, that's something to think about pronto. And then obviously, as Kerry said a while ago, everyone's going to do things slightly differently. There's a great opportunity here, I think, to be kind of learning and sharing from each other. So that's kind of why we're interested in the topic. So it'd be just good to get a sense now, really, about yourselves. So what we're going to ask you to do now, we're going to invite you into some very sort of quick check-in question, check out too soon for that. So I'd like you to put in the written chat, and then we'll see a flurry coming through. We'll have a flood of notes coming through the computer. For you personally, what is the key thing you want to retain from these 12 months of working differently? If you think about yourself, think about the way you've been working since it is pretty much a year yesterday, I think. What's the one thing you would want to retain? So go, 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 go. The flexibility definitely coming through them as the strongest word in everything that's been typed here. More ability to choose, autonomy. Sustaining the trust that you've felt from the senior managers during this time. Balance of work and home. Being able to sort of almost choose where am I most productive. And being able to more or less choose it more for myself, more choice, and sustaining the sense of camaraderie. And again, right at the beginning when we were running workshops, people were absolutely meeting for a Zoom or a Teams call, maybe every day, twice a day, once a week. And actually there was more connection than there had been previously. Okay, so it's really interesting, the flurry there and how consistent that is. And obviously that probably could be very similar for your people as well. Okay, Dave, do you want to give us a feel of the territory for the day?
Yes, absolutely. So good morning, everyone. And if you can just keep an eye on the participants, because there's a lot of people apparently still going in through the old link that before we got.
Yeah, I'm on the door. Trust me, I'm on the door.
Okay. Just to cover the territory for today that we're going to be looking at in this hour and a half. When we've done the sort of finished doing the welcome, we're going to look at what hybrid working is and isn't, and some of the definitions and myths about hybrid working. We're going to look at some insights, and we'll give you the results of the survey that we sent out to everybody, given that you're a representative sample of a population. We're also lucky to have Gary Smith here from Knockholds, who's one of our clients and comes from Knockholds Solicitors. So he's going to give you some of the kind of just very key bullet points about the legal view of hybrid working, and then you'll have a chance to engage with Gary through chat and afterwards if you want to get more details. We're then going to cover how do you engage your people in it? What are the kind of redesign principles when you're looking at it? How do you actually get it to work for everybody or as many people as possible? And we've got a hybrid leadership model towards the end about how we can help. So what we've been doing already for some organizations and what we're discussing with other organizations. And then we'll finish up with where next and give you a chance to give some feedback at the end. So hopefully that's the territory, the sort of territory that you were expecting from today. So let's just have a quick look then at what we believe hybrid working is and isn't. It's not definitive, but this is our sort of take, having done some reading on it and some discussing with some of our clients and other organizations. So what we think it is an opportunity to reevaluate how and where your people work for mutual benefit. So that mutual benefit bit is really key. It's not all about just saying anybody do what they want to. It's got to work for both the organization and the individual. A potential shift in culture to a better work-life balance, greater trust and outcome-based performance. One of the things that the pandemic has taught us already is that so many things have moved on forcibly because of what we've had to do, get used to. So agile working was just a phrase and it became a reality within about 3 or 4 weeks last year. And I think things like outcome-based performance people have been trying to get to for some time. This is an opportunity to really move it on another notch. And an approach to transform engagement if implemented wisely. And those last 3 words are really key because it can either engage or completely disengage people depending how you implement it. What it isn't is everyone choosing whether they come to work in an office or not. Just to be really clear, it's not about forcing people to work from home if they can't or don't want to. And it's not a way of staff avoiding accountability and team contact. I think one of the problems we had last March was that it happened so fast. People didn't really have much of a chance to put in practice, what do we mean by this home working? Everyone just had to suddenly work from home and then feel their way through it after that. So this is a chance to reset and really kind of recalibrate what you want it to look like. Okay, so that's just a bit of a what it is and what it isn't. I think there's some myths which we just need to address as well. One size certainly doesn't fit all. And also the old way isn't bad and lockdown habits are the only alternative. It's not about moving from bad to good. Also, when we talk to clients, there's a very, very broad spectrum, as you'll see in the surveys and the insights, that not everybody wants to get back to normal fast. People's normals are different now, and maybe they've changed for good. But not everybody's craving to get back to that old normal. There's a myth about people not working unless you watch over them, which I think is one of the things we've been trying to break as a sort of nation, really, for decades. And we know it's not true at the AND Partnership, but it's tricky when some leaders do believe that. Being seen is being valued. So that's sometimes called presenteeism now, as opposed to absenteeism. But that sort of thing about being present and being seen to be present, being absolutely key. That's a real myth that's been kind of started to be disbanded by the different ways of working. There's an assumption that people don't like their daily commute. And I think that's also a myth, because some do and some don't. I've certainly appreciated the lack of 5 a.m. starts to get down to London. But do I want to go back to some of those? Yeah, maybe, actually, because I get a lot of work done on the train, and it gives me time for some thinking time and some prep time, so that there are people's different views around things like daily commute. The myth about those requesting to work from home are less committed. I think that is going away slowly, but it's just worth kind of highlighting here. And that managers can't change their habits is sometimes a myth that people kind of believe. So those are all myths that we believe we need to look at in the context of hybrid working and how we want to really create it. And we sent you a survey, and if you do request the slides at the end, there's quite a lot of useful verbatim comments we haven't got time to go through today. But we're just going to go through some of the key things that came out of the survey. And I'm going to put sort of 4 graphs up at a time and just talk you through the key points. So, have people polled the views of the people? So 60%, over 60% have already done so. Another 20 are planning to do shortly. So that's good news. 80% of you have already polled the views of your people or got plans to do so. In terms of the percentage of your workforce that you expect to be hybrid working, so there's over 30% think 61 to 80, and sort of nearly 28%. So probably over 50% of the population is expected from this sample of the population. You think about 50% of the people will be hybrid working when lockdown ends. What percentage of your workforce do you expect to be permanently working from home? Only about 20%, 0 to 20. 80% of you said, probably less than a fifth. So you're not moving to permanently working from home necessarily. It's this hybrid working, hence, I guess, the interest in this webinar. And due to role requirements, what percentage of your people aren't able to work from home at any time? Again, quite a large number of people can't do that, somewhere in the region of 80% of your people. Okay, so that's what you said to us about those 4. There's just 4 more graphs around, do you already have a live agile working policy and approach? Over 40% of you have, and over 30% of you are planning to in the future. So some of you are already working on it, some of you have got it already. High and medium appetite for change amongst the senior leaders. Only 5% of you said low appetite. So the senior leaders see an opportunity for significant change. And not many of you, interestingly, have polled the line managers and leaders about how they feel in leading their teams in multi-locations. So that's quite interesting. Just over 20% said yes, 60% said no. And in terms of being resourced to provide discussion-based support and training to your managers, leaders, again, you've got sort of 80% either high or medium in terms of being resourced for that. So there might be some work needed in that area. So some interesting stats. Realize that you're just a population of 100, 150 people, but it's quite interesting to see how others are tackling this as an issue. And on that basis, we've just got some very quick wider insights around what are other organizations doing, and what are some surveys telling us about this. So I think it's in the press today about Nationwide. They've indicated that it does not intend to force people to return to the office if they've been successfully able to work from home during the pandemic. So Nationwide have gone public today saying that you can work anywhere, which is an interesting approach. BP have told their office-based staff that they'll be expected to spend 2 days a week working from home after lockdown, or 40% of their time if they're part-time. So they're going for a blanket percentage, which is interesting. And Goldman Sachs have gone completely the opposite way and said they've rejected remote working as a new normal and labelled it an aberration. So they've said people can't be productive at home doing what they do. So very, very different views in companies, which is interesting. And just a final one, Canary Wharf Group say that people will still want to divide their time between the workplace and home, but they are missing office and city centre life. And working from home has left many feeling fatigued, which is interesting because it is a very different sort of working over Zoom and Teams than it is when you're face to face. A final one on the insights, there's again quite a lot of data. There's more data in the slides if you do want them at the end. But a Boston Consulting Group survey said that 67% of those working remotely want to be able to split their time in the future. So 2/3 of them want hybrid working is what they're really saying there. And another survey from Sony Professional Solutions found that only 1 in 5 think their employer is prepared to support a more hybrid working model, interestingly. So that preparation of employers. Over 2/3 expect to work remotely at least 1 day a week once the pandemic restrictions ease. Quite a difference in age groups in the next one. So the 18 to 24-year-olds mostly see themselves working from home at least 2 days a week, and only 13% expect to return to an office full time. Whereas your 35 to 54-year-olds, over half of them expect to work in the office full time at some point. So that kind of highlights the cultural and age differences, I think, of the populations, of what they're used to and what they expect, and possibly their technological capability as well. Over half of workers felt employers could have done more to support them with remote working. So again, interesting. That had quite a bearing on some of the other answers in the surveys as well, as to how they felt supported during the start of the pandemic, then led them to answer questions about the future differently, was what came out of the Sony study. And 35% thought a return to the office of more than 1 day a week wouldn't happen until late 2021 or 2022 at the earliest. So very interesting that they're not thinking that they're going to be going back to the office very quickly at all. So that just gives you some of the sort of like the stats around what people are saying generally. You'll know better in your own organizations what they're saying, but it's worth checking if you don't know what they're saying, or you suspect they're saying something different to these studies. It might be worth thinking about, how do we find out what our people think if you haven't already done so? So these are just some of the benefits of hybrid working that we've already talked to clients about, and what they're finding and what they're thinking about for the future. If the staff have input into how and where they work, then there's a belief that you get increased motivation. And Anne will talk a bit about engagement in a bit. So increased motivation is one of the benefits. Increased productivity with less time traveling. Certainly takes me less time to get down my stairs than it used to get to the client's premises to run a program. Improved culture through greater trust. So anybody that's thinking about how do we move our culture on, this is a great opportunity to really do that through that improved and increased trust. Reduces presenteeism, as we said before, the need to be seen in the office. Increases well-being if implemented well, due to better leisure-work balance. So you can really get that well-being balance if you have this hybrid working. I think full home working has created a lot of pressures for certain sections of the population, particularly people living on their own, or people who've had to shield, or people who live in restricted premises without an office space to work to. So hybrid working could be the best of both worlds from a well-being perspective. There are potential cost savings if less office space is required, and it's better for the environment with reduced daily travelling for so many. And I'm sure there's lots more benefits as well. And if we think about it, we've been trying to get to work from home, and trying to get to the fact that working from home doesn't mean skiving, certainly within the last 10, 20 years. And suddenly overnight, it's kind of just happened. So it's very interesting how that agile working came to live and breathe So that's just a bit about the myths, the stats, and the benefits. We're going to come on to engagement in a second, but the final piece of this sort of just putting the factual pieces together, we thought it'd be useful for you to just hear a bit from Gary Smith from Knockholds, who's just going to give you a very brief insight into 2 or 3 of the legal points around this sort of hybrid working approach. So I'll hand over to you, Gary.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for that. Good morning, everybody. So a number of people sort of emailed over questions before the seminar, and I've tried to sort of boil those down into some key points to run through with you over the next sort of 5 minutes or so. We have got some Q&A at the end, so if you've got any further follow-up, just pop them in the chat and we can try and pick those up for you if need be. The first one is really about sort of compulsion about returning people to the office, or compulsion to force people to work from home after COVID, after lockdown. Now, typically employees will have an employment contract that will say something along the lines of, you are employed to work from our premises X or such other place as we may reasonably require. So in terms of then getting people back into the office, back to work after lockdown, as long as you've got your risk assessments in place, as long as you're COVID secure, as long as you take into account any specific health and safety or whistleblowing elements that may crop up, you can get the staff back to the office. If they refuse, it's a simple misconduct matter. Deal with that as you normally would. But going back to the point Dave made earlier, sort of compelling people to work from home, I think on the basis of that sort of mobility clause is going to be rather more difficult. And I think you'll struggle to get employment tribunal judges on board with that, because for the simple reason that you are shifting the cost. You're shifting the cost of the rent, the lighting, the heating, the electric, all the rest of it to the employee. And I think tribunals are going to be very, very reluctant to allow employers to shift that cost based purely on a mobility clause around place of work. Now, there are things you can potentially do about that. You can include some express wording in the clause saying you will work from X or such places we may reasonably require, or including your home as required, something along those lines that could help to get you over the hurdle. Or you could look at potentially an allowance for working at home to compensate for those additional costs. That might help. That then sort of leads into the second question that cropped up, and it's cropping up left, right and centre at the moment with London salary supplements, increased salaries, maybe London waiting, that kind of thing. Now, fundamentally, unless it is a very discrete allowance for London waiting, employees are entitled to their salary. Okay, and that's really as far as it goes. Having said that, this is a negotiation, and we'll be going into the importance of the communication around this going forward. It's about discussing with the staff, and you know what, if they get say £7,000 a year for a season ticket loan, but then they're going to work from home permanently, they may be willing to sacrifice some of their salary in recognition of that. But you need to have that discussion. Now, where that potentially becomes problematic is in the context of a formal flexible working request. You've only got the 8 statutory reasons to refuse a flexible working request, and a refusal to sacrifice some of your salary is not one of those 8 reasons. And so you need to be very, very careful raising this point in that context. But it's up for negotiation. The third point that came from the questions we had was the responsibility for health and safety. Now, that's very simple. You are responsible as the employer for their health and safety and their well-being. Okay, you are now, you will be if they start working from home. But equally, the employees also owe their own duty to protect their own health and well-being and that of their colleagues. And so it's a case probably of sort of tilting the focus a little bit here and asking them to feed back to you if their chair is broken, if their screens are at the wrong height, so they've got a crooked neck, all of those sorts of elements. If you're you will need to put in place risk assessments for their home working environment, but could you get them to undertake those risk assessments, maybe with a few photos, so that you can satisfy yourself they're genuinely working off a desk, not off their ironing board, which hopefully after 12 months no one is, but you get the idea, so you can push that back. But fundamentally, you are responsible. You need to make sure your insurance is in place to cover home working, whilst also making sure that the employees' home contents insurance acknowledges and notes that they're working from home. So if there's a house fire or something like that, all of your kit and equipment is properly covered. As I say, hopefully that helps. If there are any more questions, do pop them in the chat and we'll try and cover as many as we can later, or offline afterwards if needed. But I'll pass you back to Dave. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Gary. So that's the sort of legal side just started on. As Gary said, he's going to come back later, so do pop any questions in the chat. So we're now going to start talking about how we actually engage our people. So,
okay. Yeah, and I think, guys, we all know, don't we, from our own sort of experience, that actually if people come with us, then any change is much more likely to land and bring the benefits we thought it would and be sustainable. We kind of all know that, don't we? So that bit about is getting people to come with us. Now, this change, this shift in working pattern is probably the most universal that our employees have ever experienced, as it applies to all of them, all of us, their friends, their colleagues, their different organisations. It's actually even also a global requirement. So this is a kind of interesting thing from the pandemic, when it went pan, and it also meant the changes have gone pan as well. So I think that's a real opportunity, because we're all in this. Everyone has got to think about how we make these changes. But nevertheless, the way we do it will make the difference. People really wanting to come with changes and make them work, and make them iterate to become better and better, or to feel resistant. So there's almost a sort of tipping point here about opportunity to maximize engagement in whichever way you take this forward, but the risk of actually people sort of resisting it. And obviously everyone's got their own thoughts already. I asked you all, guys, which bits you wanted to retain. All your employees could answer the same question. A good proportion are polling the views of staff, but there's other angles on that, like how do the team leaders feel about it? But also, as we know, polling the views is really important, but then what happens next? So you will know a lot about this already from previous changes that you've implemented, previous restructures, things that have felt more discreet. So there's knowledge amongst you about what's going to be really important to really engage staff and yourselves, I guess, to come with you and make a success of this. So that's what we wanted to tap into next, really, is giving you some opportunity to think, okay, what are the things that we already know? What are our tips and ideas to share of how we maximize staff, employee, our people's engagement as we start to consult, to make our plans and to implement. And Kerry said something at the beginning, which is so true. None of us have done this before. So we will have to kind of like try it and see. We will need to do things and then review and reflect. So even more important to have people with us as we almost experiment and try. So it's critical, I think, to get this bit right at the beginning. And so you've got a lot of this knowledge in your head, and that's why it's a forum today. So we want to tap into that. Those of you who've just joined us later on, we are going to be sharing the slides later if you give us permission by giving us your email at the end. We are also going to share the collated outputs from the two breakout activities. This is one, and Dave's doing one later on. So what you're going to talk about now is useful for you all in terms of sharing. So if we just move on to activity, Dave. So we're going to move you into small groups of 4, and we're just going to give you about 8 minutes or so not long. But what we'd like you to do there is to share your insights, your thoughts of what needs to be considered when engaging your people. What is it you already know that helps? And then we can kind of pull that together. So you'll do a very quick who you all are. Keep that quick, please, and then get on to the sharing of ideas of what needs to be considered to engage people. Can one of you capture that? And then when you come back, we'd like you to put it in the chat. If you're technically clever enough to type it into the chat as you go, that would be amazing. I'm not quite sure you can do that from breakout rooms, but we'd like to have the sort of themes and ideas when you come back, which will be a flood. And that'll be one of the things we're going to collate as a result of this forum this morning. So we're going to give you about 8 minutes or so. So Dave will do the magic with the breakout rooms, and we'll see you again just in about 8 minutes. And then we want those insights, those tips, as it were, straight into the chat. Okay, go and have a smaller conversation. Okay, welcome back, folks. Sorry if there wasn't quite enough time. Obviously, that's a risk in these small groups. So what I'd really like you now is just one person from each of those groups just to do some typing now in the chat for what were some of your thoughts, your insights, your tips, really, of what needs to be considered to both get your people engaged and keep them engaged. So we'd like some frantic typing, please, now. This is the kind of thing that we're going to collate for you afterwards and share more widely. Okay, so here it comes. Thinking about individuals, trust.
Very comprehensive from group 22.
Yeah. Different kinds of roles, communication, 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 linking to the values. I think I saw one there, the whole business of listening. Yeah, there's going to have to be some kind of range, some kind of width to it. Yeah, really important, the line manager piece. We've mentioned that, and that's something we would see. Equipping the line managers to be able to do this. Yeah, some great stuff here. Town hall meetings, some kind of policy, senior manager buy-in. Interesting one there about male-female differences. A lot of sort of the home commitments have been more vividly picked up or shared or not in different situations. Particularly single-parent families, we've had lots of instances there where, you know, being at home is quite a different experience than if there's two adults in the family. Yeah, some great stuff there. Mindset shift. My apologies, shift. And that was our comment about agile working that somebody played back. Lots of organizations have talked about agile working, and it was just thought to mean more about don't have a fixed desk. We now see that hybrid working is going to mean so much more. Okay, that's great stuff there, guys. So we will collate that going forward from today. We will be working hard. That's very good. Can you have the summary slide, Dave? Yeah, so some things just that we know are, how will this hybrid working link to and help us achieve the vision and values? That's your real opportunity here. So we may feel it's enforced upon us, but actually seize the opportunity. This is going to really help us move forward our vision and our culture. What are any of the givens with a rationale? It's not a free-for-all, it can't be, but where you've got some givens, making sure people can clearly see the rationale, some kind of roadmap, so people see there's this phase, there's that phase, or we'll try, we'll review, so let people see the map going forward, whatever the sort of proposal are, or when it's launched, this technique of asking people what they like about the approach and what would they like to be considered for success. That's a really good feedback technique when you're putting things out there that may be contentious or not everyone likes them, because you're asking for the feedback. Given parameters, wanting to be clear what the parameters are, and allowing choice and flexibility within those parameters. And what do you need to help make this work? So this is the preference you prefer. This is what your choice is, maybe within parameters. What else are you going to need? And then asking that question again, what else is on your mind? So the listening point you made. So it's a big job, and this is what will make the difference. So hopefully that gave you some time to think about engaging others and some of the key things more generically. And so the last piece for me is around some of the sort of, the more we involve people as we move across to the right, the more people will take ownership for the change, and therefore will have more stake, more responsibility for making it work. So that echoes Gary's point about actually you might need to be making it, it's your responsibility, health and safety at home, but the style with which you talk about that encourages other people to take more responsibility for it as well. So really thinking about your style during the communications of this. And then the last one from me is around some of the tips that we've picked up from the CMI, which kind of echo very strongly what we ourselves would think is really thinking, and I've seen this a lot in the clients I'm working with, focusing much more on the outcomes you need people to produce rather than the inputs you need to see them putting in. And by managing by outcomes allows people to take more ownership and be their best. This is a real opportunity to build trust. A lot of trust has been developed the last 12 months. Don't lose it. So lean in and keep building that trust. The work is not about where you go, it's what you do, and making that shift in mindset, both for managers, senior managers and individuals. Focus on that kind of planning for the people, but also that middle manager engagement. I think that's come through in your answers as well. Listen, and then communicate personally. Now, some of that will be collective, but you need to plan for how you've got the personal place as well. Employee wellbeing is going to be a big one. That's become so much more to the fore this last year for a range of reasons. And lots of you I know have wellbeing policies and mental health support, really important. And again, the CMI highlighted this particular thing, that clearly we will be running meetings differently. we already are. We've learnt a lot, but how will we do that going forward? So just some other pointers there from a respected voice of CMI, echoing a lot of what we're saying as well. Okay, Dave.
Thanks, Anne. So as you'll be seeing now as we're going through this webinar, it's a fairly whistle-stop tour. Unfortunately, if it were as easy as doing everything to do with hybrid working in an hour and a half, then we'd all have lots more time. But we're trying to give you a sort of a roadmap or a plan or some ideas about some of the things that you need to think about. And one of the things that we specialize in is helping people to actually do the engagement and get things working, get the leaders to actually be working differently. And so what we want to move into now is the kind of what are the things you need to think about in terms of your leaders. And also the phrase we use is the being and the doing. So the how and the what. So both are equally important, but we need to think about that the natural thing that you'll be focusing on will be, how do we get the workplaces set up? What are the legal side? What is this? What is that? What is that? They all need thinking about, but then how are people going to feel about this? And how are they going to operate in new ways of working? Really, really important. So we want to spend just a little bit of time on that now. And we've put together a sort of a model, but I don't like the word model. It's more of a container for you to think about things in. And there are 5 things to focus on in our belief around the sort of leadership side of this. The first one is fairly obvious, but it's right at the center of the model, which is around the organization or the team vision, mission, and values. So this is a real chance to go back and refresh, what is it we're doing? What's our purpose? Why are we here? And how does hybrid working help us achieve that? So a really good way of getting people engaged in the vision and values. And what we tend to do is help teams or organizations to think about how they do that in a cultural sense, and how they set up events or team events to enable us or enable you to actually get people engaged in that. Okay, so the second thing that we've got is around health, safety, and well-being. And again, really important. I've just put some of the things in there that you need to think about, which we've covered some, but just to make sure we've got an idea of what we mean in here. So there's the kind of the COVID risks and the self-care, there's the work-life balance and the boundaries, there's the equipment, the risk assessments, the breaks, the screen time. So it's quite a lot of physical stuff to get sorted around whatever you decide to do around hybrid working. And it needs to be done at home and in the office. I'm sure you'll have already done a lot of this in the office if you've got offices still open. So the sort of help that we give organizations around this includes work around personal well-being, whether it be at home or at work, some workshops around personal resilience. How do people build up that resilience to be able to cope when they are doing solo working at home, for example? And some of the mental health first aid. We have a specialist in the organization who trains others in mental health first aid. So we are qualified to do that, and that's been very popular at the moment. So that's just one of the things. We'll go into a bit more detail on some of these in a second. The second one is connection and communication. So the sort of things we mean here are around tools and technology, giving people the right tools for the job. Check-ins, how do you actually connect with people, not just about the task, but about how they're feeling? And keeping people up to date. Do you need to do different methods of communication when you're doing hybrid working? And how do you within this drive innovation and collaboration? Because it's very, very important that you don't lose those from your organizations, and sometimes fracturing the teams a little bit in their working practices. If you don't put things in place, it can mean that you lose something from that. So the sort of help we provide organizations around that, and we've already done this over the pandemic, is helping people to really think about how they do remote working effectively. And also, how do you actually get people to own their own performance so that you're not having to watch over them too often? So that's the whole piece around empowerment and engagement and culture change, and taking that sort of next step into performance ownership. And we've done that for a number of organizations already. The third one is around ways of working. And this really is about home office working expectations, because they will be different in each. How do you divide the tasks, those that are in the office, those that are out of the office? And what do the team meetings need to look like now, particularly if some people are coming in from home and some are coming in face to face? How do you run hybrid team meetings effectively? And the sort of help that we're providing around this is a hybrid leadership. So what does leadership look like in a hybrid world? What does that really mean for leaders and how they have to adapt and behave to get the best from their teams, to help their people be at their best more of the time? There's also sessions we run around rebuilding teams. A lot of teams will have been disconnected for quite a while. So when you get the hybrid model sorted, there's a new way of working which will need to be explored. And how do you build that team resilience to help them to be able to withstand future changes? And the final one is around fairness, inclusivity, and equality, because hybrid working gives us a lot of opportunities, but it also gives us some potential headaches that we need to make sure we avoid. So what are the home and office working expectations? What's the working pattern and any contract change that's necessary? How do you cope with full and part-time staff to make sure it's fair for everybody? And how do you include everyone in this so that you don't miss out any section of your working population? So again, our help includes with some organizations, how do you redesign the work to include this? And also, how do you do the sort of equality, diversity and inclusion sessions? We run a session around leading for EDI so that leaders really understand what it is and how to use that in the hybrid world. So that's the kind of the container that we sort of talk about. And I just want to cover each of these just very briefly in a bit more detail and give you one more opportunity to sort of give your views in one of these sections. So briefly, the vision and values session, as I said before, is an opportunity to relaunch what is it you're trying to achieve? What's your purpose? So it's a refresh or a reset around vision and values, and demonstrating how hybrid working contributes or accelerates our intentions. If you've had any surveys, make sure you share those survey results. This is a really good platform to launch hybrid working and a communication plan for implementation. Because if you do it without the context of vision and values, then it just becomes another management fad if you're not careful. And it's much more than just restructuring work locations, as we've said before. So a real opportunity to focus on purpose and why people do what they do and what's the end goal. So in terms of health, safety and well-being, some of these might be sort of obvious, but I just want to cover a couple of things in a bit more detail in here. So you will have to establish working time and location boundaries. So when is it acceptable to contact people who are working from home? Because if you don't, people will think that they've got to be switched on every waking moment. And it's important to really establish those boundaries for everybody so that you don't have burnout and stress going on in the home. And reassuring of COVID precautions is going to be vital to minimize that anxiety. I think a lot of people are going to be quite anxious about getting back together with any large groups, not just at work. So how do you get people over that initial anxiety? So contracting how to keep in touch with individual well-being, team support for colleagues, just getting over some of those things about, is it right that we've got to have our video switched on so that I can see you when you're at home to make sure you're okay, not to spy on you, but to make sure you're okay. Dealing with logistical issues such as equipment. Have they got the right kit, the right desks, the right chairs? We might have avoided that over the last 2 or 3 lockdowns because we thought it was temporary. If it's going to be permanent, we need to make sure they've got a proper workstation or the ability to work effectively. You might need to do risk assessments, as Gary said already, and ensuring healthy work habits are understood and that ownership is taken for those. It's not acceptable. We know this, but over the pandemic, I think a lot of people have been doing 12-hour days, back-to-back Zooms, not taking lunch properly, not getting fresh air, not going for walks. We will have health issues if we don't try and put some of these practices in place. We know this, don't we? You can't stare at a screen. We've got the old VDU legislation that came in that said you've got to take breaks. And now suddenly we're in a Zoom or Teams world, and we've suddenly forgotten some of that. So it's about getting some of that established again, and also building in reviews to the whole thing. Okay, so really making sure that you focus. Now, there's two things might be helpful just for you to understand the help that we've provided organizations. The first one is what we call our Wheel of Wellbeing Energies. And we do this as an activity with people. This helps people to think about the physical, emotional, intellectual, and spirit energies and what's going on for them at the moment. And where are the areas that they might need to take some more control back of their lives. So it puts the ownership back onto the individuals and helps to have really great conversations about that. So it's worth, we just put this up here really, it'll be in the slide pack when you get it. And it's really just an opportunity to have some different conversations with people about their personal well-being. And we mentioned the mental health training that we do. There's mental health first aid, accredited qualification that we do. There's mental health awareness, which is a half-day session for all employees. And there's bespoke mental health and well-being sessions that we run for specific organizations. Things like manager awareness, building resilience, managing stress, or having well-being conversations. So we do all of those things if you have any need for any of those to help your teams. So that's 3 of the sections in the grid, in the container. The next one is the working together grid. Now, this is one of the ones that we believe is probably the most likely to get forgotten if we're not careful, because we kind of just expect people to get on with it and work together very often. And I think there's going to be a need to really rethink the way we work together virtually and face to face. So they've got, there will be days when everybody's virtual and days when everybody's face to face and a mixture in between. But there's also a need to think about the formal ways of working. So what are our processes of working together? Have we got rules as to how do we interact, how often we have meetings, etc.? And the informal ways of working. Now that's the kind of cultural glue that happens when you're in an office, sometimes naturally, but when you've actually had a break like this over the last 12 months from what was the old normal, do people know about, how are they going to want to socialize? Are they going to want to socialize going forward? What does virtual socializing look like? Because people have had attempts at that, some with more success than others. So what we'd like you to do, this is the final breakout activity. We'd like you to have a think about one of these boxes on here. And we'd like you just to populate it and have a think about what are the things we need to consider about how we do this particular shared way of working in the new world. What are the things we need to think about? So I've put a couple, just one in each box to start us off. So the formal virtual box might have things in there about setup. Have they got the right equipment or the right quiet space to work? So the formal as in a process, and that's in the virtual world. In the informal virtual world, how are we going to have unplanned contact with each other? So we haven't got to set a Zoom up to say, how are you? What does unplanned contact look like in the virtual world? In the formal face-to-face world, what's the team contact going to be? What agenda are we going to have? If we've actually got that sort of face-to-face going on, how are we going to run those meetings? And the face-to-face informal, how are we going to socialize and have fun? And I'm not talking about organized fun here. Well, I guess I am, but it's that sort of, are we just letting it evolve naturally, or are we going to create ways in which people can get together and socialize on certain days or certain ways in the face-to-face informal? Okay, so that's just giving you one as an example in each of those boxes. You might want to take a screenshot of that, or you might want to just take a photograph on your phone before I move on. What we're going to do is we're going to move you into breakout rooms. And what we'd like you to do in the breakout rooms is just to think about what are the other things that you need to think about in one of these boxes. We're going to allocate a box per breakout room. Okay, so you'll have one box to focus on and 10 minutes to do it. So have a think about what else do we need to put in that box in terms of thinking about shared ways of working. All right, so this means that in the small groups, populate one of the sections of the grid. What do we need to think about in this area? with regards to how we work. Again, you might want to take a picture or a screenshot of this slide so that you know what you're doing in each breakout room. Breakout rooms number 1 to 8, we'd like you to populate the formal virtual box. Breakout rooms 9 to 16, the formal face-to-face. Breakout rooms 17 to 24, informal virtual, and 25 to 32, informal face-to-face. Okay, so you're all just doing one box, just chatting about what else do we need to consider in one of these 4 boxes, whichever one you're doing. On your return again, can somebody take some notes and enter the room number and headlines into the chat? What we then commit to do, if you would like to have the slides, we'll also send you a populated grid with everybody's ideas in it, so that you've got some kind of template for things you need to think about in terms of ways of working. Okay, so let's just set up the breakout rooms for you. Bear with me. Okay, so it's going to be 10 minutes this time just to have a chat about what else would go in that top in one of those 4 boxes, and then we'll close the rooms and bring you back. So enjoy your conversations. Okay, welcome back everyone. If whoever from your breakout room could just enter the room number and the headlines that you talked about, we'll be able to work out what it was you were populating from that room number. So do enter that into the chat for us as you're coming back. That would be really helpful. So for those people who've just rejoined us, if you'd like to enter your room number, whoever took the notes in your group and the headlines into the chat, we'll make sure they get populated into the grid, ready to be sent round to those people that would find it helpful. Make sure you put your room number, otherwise we won't know what it is you're referring to in the headlines. Okay, so hopefully you found that useful to have a conversation about. So how do we actually, what are the things we need to think about? And some great things coming in now in terms of the formal virtual, things like cameras, headsets, face-to-face. Some of the legal questions, informality being reduced, meetups, avoiding the stress of the always on culture. I think that's really, really important. There's a real danger there. How do we recreate the virtual water cooler moments? That's the challenge for the informal virtual, certainly. Yeah. Yeah. Some of the things we need to do around safe working practices, things like pack testing. You don't think about these things, you do it in your office, but then if you've suddenly got hundreds of people working from home, how do you cope with that? Yeah, redefining possibly office space. And possibly call recording in certain industries for governance purposes. Yeah. It's really good stuff coming through here. So what we will do is we will take all of this and put it into a grid. It'll probably be a very large grid looking at how much work you've done. So we'll make sure you get that and you've got something to actually work from when you're thinking about your ways of working. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we want to make sure we finish at 11:30. So I'm going to push on because we want to get Gary coming in and answering a couple of your questions as well. The ways of working pointers then, as you've already started to say in the chat, agreeing those working expectations in the new hybrid working is really important. Which are the tasks that have to be done in and out of the office? What do we need to collaborate about? Yeah, and how do we do it? How are team meetings going to work? Encouraging team members to take ownership for social events, etc. And let's try it and review. So getting something set up that has people's buy-in and then trying it and reviewing it. So the fourth area on the grid that we talked about was connection and communication. And some of these are things we've already mentioned, and some of them might be obvious, but we have to agree how we're going to keep in touch in the new world, and what are the boundaries for home contact. Really important. How do we set up check-ins? How will we work with new joins? So some of you have already had lots of experience of that, I'm sure, because there's a whole world of working population that have never met their colleagues face to face. We don't know how tall they are, or whether they've got legs or not, or whether they're wearing shoes, or what's going on. So we're going to have to sort of, how do we set up those sort of check-ins, and new joins particularly, really important. And agreeing formal communication channels and methods. Okay, very, very good to kind of get that set up. What are the clarity of expectations, and agreeing performance outcomes and how they will be reviewed? Because you can't actually see what they're doing. How are we going to measure performance, and how are you going to review performance? Really important. And that's that performance ownership that I talked about. There is a case study which is contained within the slides if you decide you want to have those as well to have a look at. Okay, the final one is fairness, inclusivity and equality. And to start this one off, I just want to hand back to Gary for 5 minutes max, just to talk about what are the questions that have been coming in. Are there any that you want to just cover off, Gary? I'm assuming that you can hear me.
Yep, absolutely.
Brilliant.
Thanks for that, Dave. Yeah, so there were a few that came through, so thank you for that. I've tried to sort of pull those together into their broad topics. The first one was, is the employer responsible for kitting out a home office? Well, yes, fundamentally. Things like having the right chair, right desk, right equipment, that is your responsibility. Obviously, in practice, that will be a discussion with the employee. They already have their own kit. They want something very bespoke because of the nature of their home setup. You would have those discussions with them, but fundamentally it is your responsibility to provide them with the equipment they need to do their job. The second point that came across, and a few comments on this, was the question of travel costs. Who covers the travel costs? Well, I think if you are requiring somebody who is hybrid working or working from home to come into the office, it's inevitable you're going to have to pay. If they are choosing to come into the office on a day when they would otherwise be working at home, well, I'd say that that's their choice. They pay for it. But I think if you're going to have a setup where you reserve the right to require them to come in for a business meeting, something like that, and then you actually do, then you would need to pay. There was a follow-on question then about sort of dual base for their place of work. And I think really it depends on what you agree. If you agree, say, a 4 and 1, it probably isn't dual base. 3 and 2, I think you could probably get away with. But again, it depends on the circumstances. That has benefits around things like business mileage and things like that you'll need to have a look at. The third one that came out was whether you need to issue new terms and conditions. Well, if you move to hybrid working, you will certainly have to set out a written statement of the changed terms. Place of work is a Section 1 ERA requirement, so you've got to, under Section 4, write to them if you're updating that. Whether you would incorporate that into a whole new employment contract, my inclination would probably be yes, because we're not just looking at place of work, we are looking at a broader how they work, the way they work, what they do, and it's always a good opportunity to update T's and C's that are often 5-10 years old before anyone really ever looks at them again. So you definitely have to put it in writing, but you may not have to do it in a contract, but that's probably helpful. The final area that came up is this question of fairness and how you maintain fairness. This question of a two-tier workforce, those who can work from home, those who can't, the old sort of white shirts versus blue shirts, white hats, yellow hats, that kind of thing. I mean, fundamentally, this is the core challenge is going to be trying to get that balance. And I think the key to that really is going to be about communication and managerial awareness. And we covered this, and I've seen it in a lot of the comments on the breakout session. Managers need to be aware. They need to be sensitive to the needs of the staff. Most of these staff who cannot work from home, they know it and they know why, but you still need to have that communication. But you've also got to be conscious the other way. It's not only those who work from home, but it will in time, who cannot work from home. It will in time also start to affect those who do work from home. Set up such as if the directors or the business owners are in 5 days a week, does that set up a thought process in the staff on, well, I want to be a director, I want to progress. Do I have to be in 5 days a week? How does that undermine that new culture you've tried to create of a hybrid working environment? So do you need to get your directors as HR managers, do you need to start banging on the door saying, look, you need to work from home a little bit. You need to buy into this culture. It swings both ways, and it is going to be a real challenge, and it comes down to communication. What I'd possibly suggest, one of the topics we're really getting is people's roadmaps out of lockdown. Everyone loves a roadmap. Could you tie this hybrid working into a sort of a roadmap style trial? So trialing it over a 12-month period, say, bearing in mind there is risk, I'll probably get shot for this, but there's risks of further lockdown or people being required to self-isolate. Could you wrap it into a roadmap out over 12 months that you then review how hybrid working has worked from a fairness perspective at the end of that 12 months and make any changes? Staff know it's coming then, and they're anticipating it coming, so they may be more receptive to the issues that we'll inevitably have on that fairness point. I hope that covers all the questions. I think it's covered most of what's come through, but if I've missed anything, I apologize. Please do pop it back in the chat, and I'll happily follow it up later with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. That's really, really useful. I hope it's been useful having Gary's input to today. And as I said before, if you do want to continue the conversation offline with Gary, do pop it in the chat and we'll pass your details on to him, or his email's up on the screen now, so you could get in touch with him directly. So thank you very much for that. And just to really re-emphasize from our side, the things you need to think about within hybrid working around the EDI agenda is things like flexibility for roles who can't hybrid, such as frontline workers, the impact of working from home for staff such as well-being, lack of face-to-face. How can you ensure dignity and respect from all staff, regardless of where and when they're working? And also considering behaviours, expectations and standards around hybrid working to ensure consistency and clarity. So there's some real sort of things to focus on and think about in this particular topic. Okay, so we want to make sure that we get you away on time. So in the final 4 or 5 minutes, we just wanted to push pause there really. We've talked a bit about this leadership model and some of the things that we can do for organisations. If there is anything that you're interested in, do please get in touch with us around that, because we'd be more than happy just to have an exploratory conversation to start with. You might want to think about, what is my next conversation from this? You might already have those in the diary. Have I got to have a conversation within my organisation, within my professional peers, or is there anything you want to chat to us about, informally or formally? If you wish to receive the slides from today, the populated working together grid that you've contributed to, invitation to future free events like this, and any latest insights and blogs, then please join our mailing list. And to do that, just pop your email, name and email in the chat for us if you'd like to get these slides and working together grid, and then we'll make sure you get those. Obviously, we need your permission to do that. And please complete the poll I'm going to put up now about next steps. Is there anything that would be useful for you in terms of conversations? So this would be really helpful, just so that we don't start calling people when they don't need us to call them. We want to make sure that we work, get in touch with people that would find it useful. So please just answer this, if you would, for us, just a very quick poll in terms of a follow-up Zoom or in terms of a conversation. It'd be very helpful. And obviously this isn't a once only, so if you don't want us to talk to you at this stage, if there's anything that we can help you with in the future, please just come back and let us know. Okay, I think most people have completed that now. Thank you. Okay, so finally then, it just remains to say that we'd love to stay in touch with you. If you would like to, please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. The things at the bottom there, there's the email address, there's the phone number, and we've got a new website now. So we're anxious to get any feedback on the new website. Please have a little look if you haven't already done so. If any of you have got the you've got the camera on your phone, if you're actually on the phone, I realize this is quite difficult, but if you've got a phone and you're able just to scan the QR code, there is a very short 5-question feedback form, which we'd really appreciate any feedback on, just so that we can continually improve these events, really. So do feel free to do that. But from Anne, Gary and I, just a big thank you for joining us today. We can do this sort of session internally in your organization if it's useful. If you're just at the start of your hybrid journey and you want to think about how do I take this forward and get people stimulating their thoughts, that might be another thing to have a think about. But so yeah, just a really big thank you to you for joining and participating in the breakouts. We'll give you a couple of minutes back to have a comfort break before your next meeting, because you know what it's like. So best of luck, and we'll hope to be in touch with some of you very soon. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and
Thank
goodbye.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.